All right, join me on page 142 of the social studies textbook. Follow along in your textbook. So if you don't have your textbook out now, you need to pause the video and get your textbook out and follow along. Okay, the Old Kingdom. You're visiting the Egyptian city of Giza in 2510 BC. Gazing out into the desert, you stare in awe at the gigantic rock carving rising from the sands. It has the body of a lion and the head of a man. For years you have heard of this wonder, the great monument called the Sphinx. Work on this project was begun before you were born. Even now, long lines of workers are hauling huge blocks of stone on a series of rollers to the construction site. Nearby stand 3 huge tombs of Egyptian kings. You pass along a street of artisans. The air rings with the sound of chisels striking stone. Many sculptures are needed to prepare the tombs of kings for a royal afterlife. You can see here, if you look up from the text in the video, here's right about where the Sphinx, and there's those 3 tombs. Notice how there's Giza, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. But notice it's right by that Nile Delta that we talked about yesterday, okay? All right, continuing in your textbook on page 143, Egypt unites. Follow along. Between 3500 BC and 3100 BC, Upper Egypt grew in wealth and power. The kingdom traded goods and conducted diplomacy, or relations between countries, with Lower Egypt. However, the Upper Egyptians wanted to control all Egypt. About 3100 BC, King Narmer of Upper Egypt, who some experts believe was the legendary King Menes, had conquered Lower Egypt. He united the 2 lands and built the city of Memphis as the new capital. Egypt's union established the world's first nation state, a region with a united people and a single government. King Narmer's rule marks Egypt's first dynasty, or Dynasty 1. A dynasty is a series of rulers from the same family. About 31 dynasties ruled Egypt over more than 3,000 years. Historians divide Egypt's dynasties into 3 periods: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. The Egyptians considered the kings of the Old Kingdom to be living gods, acting as the connection between the gods and the people of Egypt. The people believed that kings could never be wrong and were able to control the Nile's flooding and the food supply. These beliefs not only helped unify the Egyptian people, but also allowed the kings to maintain their authority. The king owned all the land and so controlled both the economy and the government. The vizier, or chief advisor, carried out the king's orders. Other officials collected taxes, planned building projects, and made sure the laws were obeyed. Members of the royal family held the highest public offices. Beginning in Dynasty 5, many helped the king rule by acting as nomarchs, or governors, who ruled administrative areas called nomes. Ancient Egypt was divided into 42 nomes. So if you want to think about it, you can think of nomes as like being different states. If it helps you kind of visualize what that kind of government means. So just like the United States is broken up into states and then each state has its own governor, Egypt was broken up. Instead of calling it states, though, they referred to them as nomes, and they broke it up into 42 nomes, and each nome was led by a nomarch or a governor who answered to the king. Okay. Turning the page, page 144, again follow along in the text. Written forms of language. About 3100 BC, the Egyptians developed a writing system that used hieroglyphs. or picture symbols. The Egyptians may have borrowed the idea of writing from the Sumerians. Early Egyptian hieroglyphic writing had more than 700 symbols. Each glyph represented a sound, an object, or an idea. At first, the Egyptians used hieroglyphs mostly for religious purposes. In fact, the word hieroglyph means holy carving. Scribes carved hieroglyphs on the stone walls of temples, tombs, and palaces. Later, scribes began to record government information, such as royal ceremonies, tax collecting, and even the depth of the Nile. To keep more and more records, the Egyptians invented a paper-like material called papyrus. To make papyrus, the Egyptians pressed together strips from the stalk of the papyrus plant, a reed that grows in marshy areas. Scribes wrote on papyrus with tools made from reeds sharpened to a point. Soot, the fine black powder from smoke, was mixed with water to serve as ink. For the Egyptians, a book was a scroll, a roll of papyrus sheets joined end to end. Some scrolls were more than 100 feet long. Turning the page, now I'm on page 145. Building the pyramids. The Old Kingdom is known as the Age of Pyramids. During this 500-year period, the Egyptians developed the technology to build the largest stone structures in the world, the pyramids. These structures served as tombs for Egyptian rulers. In the 2600s BC, King Zohr of Dynasty III became the first king to be buried in a stone pyramid. This was the famous step pyramid at Saqqara, named for its step-like sides. No one knows exactly why Egyptian kings began building pyramids, but these structures symbolize many ideas. For example, the pyramid shape is identified with the sun god Ra. The best known of Egyptian pyramids is the Great Pyramid at Giza. It was built for King Khufu of Dynasty IV and completed about 2566 BC. Originally 480 feet high, it is made up of more than 2.3 million stone blocks. Each block averages about 2.5 tons. King Khufu's son, King Khafer, ordered the building of one of the other two pyramids at Giza, as well as the Sphinx. The pyramids help us understand the relationship between religion and the social and political order in early Egyptian society. As godlike rulers, the kings were able to use huge amounts of Egypt's resources and the whole society to build pyramids. Farmers may have worked on the pyramids during periods of Nile flooding. It is likely that female workers were responsible for feeding and clothing the pyramid builders. All right, thanks for listening and following along. Continue now in your social studies worksheet in Google Classroom. And again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. All right, thanks again, and I'll see you on the next one.